Jacob caught it as well. In fact, he grabbed the clip. And I just have to share this with you. This is what Senator Kirk had to say about our current deficit. Now, keep in mind, at the end of World War II, we had a deficit that was 126% of GDP. In other words, it was bigger than the entire gross domestic product of the United States. Right now, we have a deficit that's about 90% of GDP. So we're not as bad off if debt or deficits are a big deal. We're nowhere near as bad off as we were after World War II. So here's what the Republican Congressman Hartmann had to say about this.
We had a tremendous deficit like this right after World War II. And because we had fiscally conservative leaders, we paid off those huge World War II deficits, unlocked the economy that became the superpower called the United States of America.
Because we had fiscally conservative leaders. Now, I just have to, these guys, these Republicans, they rewrote it successfully. I mean, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it, but they successfully rewrote the history of Ronald Reagan's presidency, which, in my opinion, was one of the most failed presidencies in the history of the United States. More of his senior officials went to prison than any other president in history, or were convicted of high crime. It was arguably the most corrupt of all presidencies. Iran-Contra, the president himself nearly went to prison. And probably if he hadn't answered, I don't remember 160 times when he was deposed on this criminal action, he may have gone to prison. If he didn't have his Alzheimer's saved him, right? Don't get me started. They've rewritten the severe recessions after Reagan cut taxes on rich people. With 12% unemployment as a consequence of that, the crash of the S&Ls as a result of Reagan deregulating the banks. I mean, I could go on and on. It was a disastrous 8 years, and it's been a disastrous 30-plus years since 1980, 1981, January 1981, when Ronald Reagan was sworn in. But Harry Truman, who was president after World War II, when we had this 129 or 126% of GDP debt, and Dwight Eisenhower, who followed him, a Democrat and a Republican, were not what the insane Republican senator, Mr. Kirk from Illinois, says is fiscally conservative. We did not cut our way out of that debt. We grew our way out of that debt. And we grew our way out of that debt by having protectionist trade policies with an average tariff of around 30% on goods imported into the United States, so we would manufacture things here. We grew our way out of that debt by having, at that point in time, the highest level of unionization in the history of the United States. We grew our way out of debt by having a top marginal tax rate on millionaires and billionaires. This didn't hit the average working person, but when you made over what in today's dollars would be about $3 million a year, your federal tax rate became 91%. We had corporations who were paying 30% of the total cost of government through their income taxes during that era, during the Eisenhower era. And now they're paying 6% because they're going offshore to reincorporate the Cayman Islands. And they're keeping their losses here in the United States, and they're keeping their profits overseas. Something that was illegal during the Eisenhower administration and the Truman administration. Another wondrous thing that we can thank Mr. Reagan for. We grew our way out of this when the wage differential between CEOs and workers was 30 to 1. Right now it is, on average in the United States, around 600 or 700 to 1. And in some industries like the health insurance industry or the financial services industry or the oil industry, it can be 40 or 50,000 to 1. And we grew our way out of that horrible debt that we ended up after World War II, where we basically just took all of our national resources and threw them into defeating Tojo and Hitler. We grew our way out of that by Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower throwing money, federal money, like there was no tomorrow, at the Eisenhower National Highway System, at schools. We were building schools like crazy in the 1950s. at major energy infrastructure projects like dams and bridges. We electrified the rural parts of the United States because in those places where electricity was provided by private corporations, it wasn't profitable to take electricity into rural areas. So FDR created the REA, which was still in existence after World War II, the Rural Electrification Administration. The federal government said, okay, if you guys won't pay to put electricity into people's homes, we will. And then when telephones became popular, there was the Rural Telephony Administration, the RTA. We should have that right now for broadband. One of my brothers lives in rural Michigan, and has to deal with this horrible DSL line. I think he's at the end of the line. It's hard to download anything of any substance. That shouldn't be in America. And you look at all of the developed countries in the world, and we're like, in the middle to the bottom in terms of quality of high-speed broadband available in terms of, the percentage of people available to it. So, we should be doing an RBA, Rural Broadband Administration. I mean, these presidents, Truman and Eisenhower, grew us out of a 129% of GDP debt. We owed more than we made in the entire economy in an entire year. In fact, in a year and about 4 months. We owed that at the end of World War II. And we didn't cut anything to get out of that debt. We grew our way out of that debt. And we did it by stimulating the economy, by spending federal dollars on dams and bridges and schools and highways and hospitals, and by having a strong labor movement so that you had a lot of workers who were suddenly making very good wages in the 1950s. And guess what happens when workers make good wages? They pay taxes. And the tax collections went up and the deficit went down. And it wasn't just the workers. As I said, anybody making over $3 million a year in today's dollars was taxed at a 91% rate. And here's what Mark Kirk had to say. Hit that, Jacob.
We had a tremendous deficit like this right after World War II. And because we had fiscally conservative leaders, we paid off those huge World War II deficits, unlocked the
This man is absolutely insane. 15 minutes past the hour.